The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. My name is Chris Shelton. I am your host. Thank you for joining me this week. I am finally back with Jon Atack. Welcome back to my show, Jon. It's been so long you haven't even been on the Speaking of Cults podcast. The last time we spoke, it was back on Sensibly Speaking, which, you know, is the appropriate title for conversations with you. We are sensibly speaking. But anyway, welcome back to my channel, Jon.
See you. Yeah, I mean, we have over the years done so much together. It's we go back 10 years this June when you turned up in Toronto.
Yes.
And went on the stage and helped to demonstrate training routines and book one auditing. And you were very good. I actually rewatched that the other week and I was really pleased with it. Because, I mean, often people don't, you know, we talk about Scientology and what happened, but what do they do? You know,
exactly.
What are the training routines? And so you get to see Christian Shurko under your direction shouting at an ashtray and giving it the wrong ideas so that he'll understand that words are not intentions, which is very useful if you're having to deal with ashtrays in the real world.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, David Miscavige, of course, when David Miscavige dismissed Mary Sue Hubbard, he threw an ashtray at her. And so, you know, it's part of the scriptural reference of Scientology. The
ashtrays are, yes, very, very canonical.
Canonical.
Yes, exactly. Actually, I don't think enough love is given toward that whole Toronto conference and effort, because that was a tremendous organizing effort at herding cats in the ex-Scientology world many years ago. You know, and this is now preserved on video. Y'all can find this. There were a number of presentations done about the subject of Scientology and by ex-Scientologists and even by professionals. It was the first time that I heard a biochemist, PhD level scientist, actually break down the purification rundown, the whole sauna detox thing. And right from the get-go, not only are there, you know, this problem and this problem and this problem, the entire concept of the purification program is itself a fallacy.
Yeah,
you know?
she was really mind-boggling. I hadn't met her. Jim Beverly invited her, and she was specifically, I think, a toxicologist.
Yes.
So, and she was so even-handed. You know, I tried to say, well, you know, can we eat polar bear livers? You know, and she seemed to think that would probably be okay. But she was so neutral and scientific about what she said. And so she'd point out, well, he says it will probably be found out that, or something like that, and saying, well, and as yet it hasn't been. And, you know, of course, we then had Jerry Armstrong was there, who was one of the guinea pigs on the original SWEAT program.
Yes.
Out of which the purification rundown came. I interviewed a doctor who told me about two people who died on the first purification rundown at St. Hill. And said,
wow.
You know, please don't mention this, because he was the doctor who checked them out.
Oh, my God. I knew about a death that happened in West US under, you know, while I was managing West US orgs, and the fact that we were absolutely prevented from taking any action or investigation or anything on that by the Office of Special Affairs, because they wanted the whole thing shut down. No mention of it, no writing anywhere, every single reference, telex, report, everything. Within 2 hours of the event happening, all of it was erased from data files, from the Scientology systems, and any record of that death completely erased. And I was absolutely, stuck in the middle of it, absolutely stunned that this was happening. So to learn later, coming out of Scientology at this conference from this scientist how unscientific this entire process was that I had been trained in, had overseen. And that was just one part of that conference. There were so many things that were talked about and that we went over there, that I learned there for the first time, that floored me, absolutely floored me as an ex-Scientologist, as an experienced Sea Org member, been around the block, seen all the things. Learned so much at that. So I just realized we don't really throw enough love in that direction. So because you and Jim Beverly were the ones who did all the hard lifting of putting that whole thing together.
Yeah, it was 18 months putting it together, and when we got to the final stretch, Jim Beverly had been a bit slow in promoting it, in announcing it. So it was on in the June, and it was only announced in the April, and I was already saying, I don't think we should do this. And then he found out that Tyndale Seminary, where he was a professor of Christian thought and ethics, weren't going to host it. They weren't going to let us use the conference room. They weren't going to give us beds for people to sleep in. And Jim, being an insanely generous human being, but not necessarily economically very sensible, funded it out of his own pocket. So I think he paid some people's flights, and he booked rooms for people at the Sheraton and booked the conference center and hired a 4-camera professional TV crew. And I was saying, we can't do this, Jim, we just can't do this. And he was insistent. I got there, and the day I arrived, I found I wasn't going to be paid. The $3,000 that I was meant to be paid wasn't there, because he hadn't got enough of his students coming from the college, so the college wouldn't pay my fee. But we hadn't really organized it. It was the Sunday, we started on the Monday, and on the Sunday I was putting together the program. So
oh man! What?
And then along the way, incredibly, I think there were 28 presenters in all, including yourself. And we had somebody who'd been with Hubbard, starting with Hannah Whitfield, Hannah Eltringham, who I think joined in 63. So she'd been there at briefing course lectures and told us about some of his bizarre epileptic mannerisms during those things, much to the delight of Yuval Laor, who also was, he turned up for the first time. He came up.
That's when I met Yuval for the first time. That's right.
Yep, me too, all of us.
Yeah.
And he walked up to me and he said, I've been using your work for 20 years in his doctoral research. And I think I used the line that Buddy Guy used when Jimi Hendrix said to him, I've been using your licks for years. And Buddy Guy said, I don't get no checks.
Exactly.
But Yuval and I have continued to work closely together these 10 years, and it's been an incredible relationship. He is so, so smart. But I mean, Nan McLean turned up, and that just absolutely blew my mind that Nan and her son Jon turned up, because they only lived an hour away. And Nan was, I think, 92. And she and Lorna Levitt stood up to Scientology through the 70s in Canada with maximum harassment. And she was just, it was, getting her and Paulette Cooper back together, and Steve Hassan bursting into tears, talking, from the audience to Paulette about how grateful he was, how she'd helped him come out of the Moonies in the 1970s. And then we had an afternoon of lawyers who were suing Narconon. That was quite good fun.
That's right.
So 10 years have gone by. My plan was for that to go everywhere. And because Jim needed to make money back, he restricted it. And so for 10 years, you've basically had to hire it. About 100 people have seen it. So I started putting the videos up. I put a few up about 3 years ago. And we got 25,000 views on one of them, which is a bit better. But it is my intention now, by the 10th anniversary, which is the end of June, all the videos will be available. Some of them may still be in our Patreon, but we are gradually pushing them out. Because, yes, it's really important to analyze and understand this experience, not just to share stories about it, but to get that we were subjected to the most elaborate form of thought reform ever devised by man. Chinese brainwashing doesn't compare. MK Ultra, forget it. Hubbard got something together that, you don't know it's happened to you. as Steve Hassan has said for many years, how would you know if you'd been brainwashed?
That's right.
What would be the sign? So, yeah, that will all be available. And
that's awesome.
Here we
I'm
are
really glad that
celebrating.
that's getting out there.
Yeah, celebrating the 75th. Sorry, go ahead.
So, no, I was just going to say, I was just saying it's important stuff. And on this 75th anniversary of Dianetics, today is May 9th, in the year of our Lord 2025. And here we are, 75 years ago.
AD 75, I think you'll find it is, right. After Dianetics.
That's right.
It's not that he was 75. In any way narcissistic, claiming to have made the only contribution to humanity in 50,000 years in fundamentals of thought.
No, it's horrible. But I thought it appropriate that we talk about that. And actually, your lead in there was just a perfect transition, because you're absolutely right. In all the things that I've studied over the years, the only thing that Scientology dogmatically, in other words, like procedurally, doesn't do is beat you as part of the
David Miscavige has made up for that too.
That's right. But if you join the Sea Org, that added bonus, right, that deficiency will be fulfilled. Yeah. I was beaten in the Sea Org. Everybody gets something happening to them there. It's just not a pleasant place. And it's a natural consequence of the Scientology indoctrination and processing that you would become a violent person. It's not necessarily that everybody goes there, but it would be a natural outgrowth or consequence of the teachings. That Hubbard is crystal clear in his teachings and writings that it is that physical violence in the service of accomplishing the mission of Scientology is completely acceptable, and in fact is your responsibility, because you have to move people out of the way, who are getting in your way and that kind of thing. But pulling back to Dianetics, where it all began, I thought let me just comment on that specific point. That in my little booklet about Scientology, which I have somewhere here, Scientology, the Cult of Greed, I reproduce a handwritten Hubbard memo where he says if anybody interferes with Scientology, he will personally beat their teeth in. That is now part of scripture by the statement of the Religious Technology Center. This is scripture, inviolable scripture. So L. Ron Hubbard, if you do anything that messes with Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard will come and find you and beat your teeth in. Now, I haven't seen him yet, so that wasn't true. Apparently not. Apparently not. But having gone down a lot of rabbit holes now, and I know you have too over the years, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Unification Church, or Moonies, you and I have had long discussions about Soviet communism and brainwashing techniques, or thought reform techniques, if you will. That word brainwashing is so controversial.
It's what the Chinese called it. They have the right to call it that. It's Sinao. And people talking about it don't understand the Confucian reference in there, which the Chinese understand, which is the washing of the heart, which is, of course, the organ of thought to the Chinese, traditionally. Yes. Stomach does other things. That, God damn it, whatever sociologists think, this is what the Chinese people call it. Yes, we can call it re-education, which is what they translated into from their Politburo. But thought reform, re-education, brainwashing, who cares? It is describing something that actually happened. And as you say, had physical violence involved with it and confinement, both of which are practices. I'm very sure that the Rehabilitation Project Force was, I think Hubbard had read Lifton when he was in Queens, New York in 72, 73. I kept writing to Jim Dinkelsey, who was with him, year in, year out, saying, did he read Lifton? Because he got him his books, and I never got a response. And sadly, he's no longer with us. But it seems that Hubbard would, him writing the brainwashing manual and pretending that Beria had written it, which the internal evidence disputes that. There was no such thing as the Moscow State University where it was meant to happen at the time. Beria was dead and couldn't possibly have mentioned the Church of Scientology, which one of the editions does. But I also talked to two people who were there when Hubbard dictated it. Nibs de Wolf and John Sanborn were both there hearing him dictate it. So I'm, all of these airy-fairy arguments about whether or not. It's like, well, that's kind of straightforward, really.
Exactly.
But we can brainwash faster than the Russians, total amnesia in 20 seconds. L. Ron Hubbard.
Yep.
We have ways of making slaves here. Philadelphia, 1952. So,
Yep.
yeah, he was very much aware of what he was doing and how it worked.
That's right. That's right. And that's where Dianetics features. But that's what I wanted to talk about today, right? Is this idea that this book is some, was corrupted, somebody used it badly. I don't know, all this nonsense. It seems to me very, very clear that Hubbard had clear-cut intentions right from the get-go to deceive people, right? I doubt that in May 9th, 1950, even his grandiosity imagined what Scientology would end up becoming as a worldwide movement. I don't think he had hopes quite that high from the very beginning, but I do think that he had ulterior motives. And we have discussed many of those, from occult beliefs to, money-making ideas to, the serial philandering that he engaged in. I mean, he was a man of many motivations. And it's not, it would be, it's not our style to break that down to simplicities of Hubbard was just a scammer. He was more than that. But the work of Dianetics is what started it all. Prior to the publication of Dianetics, Hubbard was a middling science fiction fantasy genre author, a failure as a World War II officer, and a failure as a father and husband.
A failure as an explorer.
And there we go.
And a failure as a student of gurus, none of whom he'd met. And if we look at the lead up, I mean, the first mention we have of Dianetics, and if we go back to the period where he's saying, he got this technique together in Oak Knoll Hospital by putting on a white coat and going into the library pretending to be a doctor so he could get access to the medical papers. Well, okay, I started there. There was a medical paper, probably in that library, written by Grinker and Spiegel, who were two psychiatrists working with American airmen in North Africa. And it's pretty much what's described in Catch-22. That they were there doing that, and they were having to deal with people who had parachuted out of burning cockpits and who often had very severe burns. And they started giving them the drug phenobarbital, the barbiturate. Hubbard, in a lecture, and if somebody wants to check it, it's in the Research and Discovery volumes, but there's precise references in my paper, Never Believe a Hypnotist, which is an L. Ron Hubbard quotation from Science of Survival, where he says he made himself a guinea pig in an experiment to get off phenobarbital. So he publicly admitted that he'd taken the specific drug that Grinker and Spiegel were using. There was similar work being done by William Sargent, who became the #1 suppressive person in the UK, and would write the wonderful book Battle for the Mind in the 50s. They were dealing with profoundly battle traumatized people. Sargent was dealing with tank crews who could have been trapped in a tank that was on fire. And they believed that they developed a method of abreacting or reliving trauma that would release the trauma. And Grinker and Spiegel, in fact, published a book shortly after the war called Men Under Stress, in which they outlined this method, which has tremendous similarities to Dianetics. Then I was very lucky. I got the second edition of the book, which is from, I think, 1960, where they explain why it doesn't actually work. It seems in the short term to have this effect. Now, they in turn are leaning upon work that was done by Josef Breuer, who was Freud's mentor.
Yes.
And Freud talks about, in the Worcester, Massachusetts lectures just before the war, at a time when L. Ron Hubbard was a little wee bairn. So unless he'd got split thetans, he wasn't actually giving these lectures, where Freud explains the method, counting backwards, the chains of incidents. He does mention trauma of unconsciousness, which Hubbard says he doesn't. He talks about finding the earliest incident. the word chain is there. The word charge for emotional trauma is there.
Yep.
And curiously, Hubbard says he met Commander Thompson, who had studied with Freud and taught him the Freudian mysteries. Well, he did meet Commander Thompson. They spent 4 days together on a boat going through the Panama Canal. Russell Miller found the log, and there it is. They did meet. He was 12 years old, which is, curiously, what he says. He told the truth about that. He was 12 when he met him. Thompson never studied with Freud, so that bit's not true. During the Armstrong case in '84, Vaughan Young managed to find a postcard that had been sent to Freud by Thompson, and that was their entire contact, that he had actually sent him a postcard, which is nice, But in the lecture, Freud explains that this method, which was the original method out of which analysis came, was used by Joseph Breuer on Anna von O, the first case. And what is not explained in the lecture is what happened to Anna von O, that after receiving this therapy, she was committed to an asylum as a morphine addict by Joseph Breuer. He signed the papers for it, who had actually introduced her to morphine. So that was the first Dianetics session, and that's where it went. What Freud says is it doesn't resolve the transference, that the whole idea of Freudian analysis, which I think is nuts, but we won't get into that here. The whole idea is that you are transferring authority to people and responding towards them in the way that you responded towards your parents as an infant. And so you want to resolve the transference so they can behave in a more grown-up way. And he said it makes you more dependent, this technique. So there's where
right.
Hubbard got this bit of the technique from. If he read Grinker and Spiegel, he went back to the Freud. There was very little by Freud published in English in 1923 when he met Commander Thompson. These lectures were given in Massachusetts, so they were available.
That's right.
In January 1949, he writes
let me stop you for just a second. Let me stop you because I wanted to comment on those lectures. I've gone through those myself at this point, and they are absolutely fascinating. They're not very long. It's not a long, involved read to go through these 6 lectures that Freud gave. The transcripts are available online. They're easily accessible. And in them, you will also find very interesting points made about the relationship of hypnotism to what Breuer was putting out, right? Breuer's thing was about doing this under hypnosis. And Freud was like, yeah, maybe we could do this without doing that. No, doesn't work without it. Doesn't work without it. And I think this is what appealed to Hubbard's hypnotic training and desire to get one over on people, because this seems to be a characteristic Hubbard had since being a child, right? Is let me get one over on other people. And the more I can do that, the better of a human being I am in my own eyes. This is Hubbard's megalomania speaking here, right? Me putting words to it. But I believe this was core to Hubbard's personality through his entire life.
And he admitted it. When Charlie Nairn interviewed him in '68 for the wonderful Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard, which everybody in the world should watch, because you see how he really is. But Charlie said that when he had 3 hours talking to Hubbard before he started recording at 4 a.m. And he said to him, "It's a scam, isn't it?" And Hubbard admitted it. And he said, "Oh, that must be really difficult for you, having to pretend all the time to everybody." And Hubbard was, "Yes, it was really difficult for me. What a hard life I have." And he said, "Why do you do it?" And he said, "Well, the first thing is, it's great being able to tell your wife we made another $10,000 today." This is 1968, so this is like $100,000 a day. It's great being able to say that. But the real reason is I like to catch the clever ones and reel them in. And when Charlie told me that, I was like, he's a 10-year-old. He's a 10-year-old psychopath. He just wants to get his own back on everybody by entrapping them. Yeah,
that's right. And that emotional immaturity is something that I think we would find a common trait amongst predator personalities, right? Because they never accomplish the full, for one way of thinking about this, or one way of describing, predatory personalities at their core, is that these are people who have never fully grasped theory of mind in a way. You know, this concept that other people exist as independent people. You know,
solipsists, yeah.
Yeah, they're very, and solipsism meaning that you have a belief that the entire world is a product of your imagination, of your creation, that everything exists for you. And hard solipsism is the ultimate expression of that.
It's part of a dream. Hubbard wrote a story called One Was Stubborn, where in the 40s where he touches on this, and it shows he's aware of this and his behavior throughout his life. Eric Fromm talks about narcissism not being self-love, but being the inability to love, and that therefore to feel that they exist, narcissists need other people to adulate them.
That's it.
And Hubbard, he's just got no concern. This, if anybody wants to dig it out, the two accounts of two short accounts of psychoanalysis, Penguin Books. This has the Worcester, Massachusetts lectures in, and as Chris says, the relevant lectures are very short and very much like Hubbard, the way that Freud boasts about himself and gets paranoid. It's like, oh, similar personality types.
I noticed those parallels. Yes, very much so. Because I am no advocate for Freud. I really am not down with Freud's version of psychotherapy. There's so much arbitrary opinion and judgment laid in on the top based on Freud's cultural and educational views that are not objective science, right? But it was a beginning. It was a start.
Right, it isn't. No, it's not even a start. Pierre Janet is a start.
No, I was going to bring up Pierre, but I was going to say, even that actually is a little bit of a lie, because it goes back to Pierre Janet, right? Who was the guy who actually first put out, hey, maybe the past has something to do with the present in terms of our behavior. This was a relatively new and revolutionary idea in the 1800s, you know?
I'm going to take you back to the year 1210 for this idea. And the work Parsifal by Wolfram, where the Fisher King, who was made famous in the Terry Gilliam film, which has very little to do with your Parsifal story. But the Fish King and Fortas, the question that he has to be asked to relieve him is, what caused your wound? Now, if we translate the word wound into modern language, that is the word trauma. That is what the word means. What caused your trauma? What traumatized you? So the question was being asked in 1210 as an aspect of a massively successful story that even Richard Wagner made a thing about. So this idea of the talking cure, which of course is not an expression that's original to Freud, he picked it up from one of his clients. People had been, you even have Hippocrates, so we can go back before Jesus, saying until you've talked about it, you're not over what happened to you. So
there you go.
Yeah, Freud becomes the focus of that, and I'm sure we'd agree that it's nonsense. His idea that between the age of 1 and 1.5, you were trying to have sex with the parent of the opposite sex and kill the other one is stupid. And he held to it, seduction theory, to the end. Ernest Jones' biography of him, which is the authorized one, has a letter from Freud saying, it's such a shame I had to withdraw this. There was no objective proof for anything. Id, ego, superego. It's a great story that people are still buying. And after that, you then get Jung and Adler, and Ferenczi is a little bit more sensible. Our friend Dan does that, so it can't be too bad. Wilhelm Reich, you get some pretty mad shit coming out of there. But and also the idea, we now sort of go, well, dynamic therapy, the idea of talking about your past may not be useful. Debriefing work that was done in the 1990s tended to show that it'd actually make it worse.
Exactly. It's very, and it comes down to the fact that what we're still dealing with is so wildly individual that making broad statements about it is really counterproductive at this point for us, because every single time over the last 11 years that I've been diving into this shit, every single time I've seen some absolutist type statement made about psychological principles, within a week, a month, a year, I have a laundry list of exceptions to those absolute rules, right? Every single time, which is not to say that the rules don't hold true in some cases under some circumstances. And this is the difficulty of psychology and psychiatry, really, is the variability, right? There are so many variables at play that making it into a science is, it's a task, and it's one that not everybody in the world from Freud forward has really acknowledged as the monumental task it really is. They try to dumb it down, simplify it, make some model like id, ego, superego. That's a model. That's a way of thinking about our thinking. Hubbard's model is the reactive mind, somatic mind, analytical mind, and away we go with Dianetics, right? Here's another model for you. Everybody's trying to model what's going on, but the fact is that human beings are really complicated. And when you add our social networks, it exponentially becomes complicated, because then you take a unit of one and all the things that go on in here and you multiply it by the number of people in your social networks, and you can just forget about it when it comes to trying to isolate all the variables. We are not a physics equation, and so the difficulty of this is immense. And a lot of people look at Dianetics, coming back to that 75 years out, and they go, well, here's a model here, it makes sense to me. I got engrams, I can see it. I got secondaries. It makes sense to me, right? But the reality of Dianetics, and I think the thing I wanted to talk about today with this, is the fact that it is a control system. It's a fake model. That's the horrifying thing about this world, is that you have people who are trying to help other people, legit trying to help, trying to figure it out, trying to come up with ways to model this stuff. And then you have the cons. You have the people who are just faking it, who are just pretending. And it can be really hard to tell the difference. And I thought I'd sort of poke at you a little bit on this, of like, how do we tell the difference? Because it's easy to go to the scams and go scam, 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 but not everything's a scam. How are we supposed to navigate this?
Well, as an 18-year-old, I've met when I interviewed John McMaster, the world's first real clear. I said to him, "How did you get into Scientology?" He said, "I was born in Durban." And we had to listen to the next half hour of it, which I found he'd already pre-recorded because he accidentally pressed the play on his cassette recorder. So I'm not going to do that to you, but it's going to be something like, firstly, trying to treat the human mind in a hard scientific way. If you just look at chemistry and you say, look, we've got hydrogen and oxygen. Here we go. They pair together. Two hydrogens, one oxygen, H2O. Nice and simple. Now, let's look at elementary combinations that have 120 different elements in them. Let's look at all of the different chains and what have you. Well, with a human being, you're dealing, even before we get spiritual, you're dealing with how many hormones, enzymes, neuropeptides, and their interactions. And this has become fake. So people say, well, serotonin's a happy chemical. Not true. They say melatonin is the chemical that sends you to sleep. Not true. They say oxytocin is the cuddle chemical. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. No. What wakes you up in the morning is orexin or hypocretin. Not true. None of these things are true. They're all taught. And when we're feeling sciencey, we say, oh, I need a serotonin reuptake inhibitor or something like this. We don't actually know what's going on. Meta-analyses of oxytocin, melatonin, and serotonin 2 years ago all showed that there is no conclusive evidence as to their act and effectiveness. So with, say, orexin, hypocretin, what wakes you up in the morning, what was meant to be the opposite of melatonin, if you don't have cortisol, it doesn't work. Oh, but cortisol's the thing that makes you anxious, isn't it? Yes, but you'd be dead without it. So it's all about the gradations and the different quantities. And if our biochemistry is that complex, oh my God, the human thought. Look at all the work on George Bonanno's work on PTSD, which has been incredible since the 90s, where he's saying after 9/11, they set up massive trauma centers to deal with all of the people who'd be traumatized. Nobody showed up. And Bonanno, that's part of the study he was doing, is saying, actually, we really haven't understood this, that firstly, a lot of people are resilient. Secondly, a lot of people are able to deal with their trauma. I've often recommended Shattered Assumptions by Ronnie Janoff-Bullman as a primer on PTSD, because she's dealing with people. Judith Herman, I'm kind of, yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying, but I don't agree. It's not what I've seen in the world. Whereas Ronnie Janoff-Bullman, where she, for example, talks about denial and says, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's sensible not pushing people to stop denying something. Maybe there is a natural process where for a year after your spouse dies, you'll put out a cup of coffee for them. Maybe telling them, no, they're gone. You've got to face up to reality. Isn't. And maybe there are natural... We don't know.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Of course. Again, it is so variable.
Yeah.
Some people, yes, some people no, right? It really depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I mean, even in terms of diet, that each individual metabolism is so different. So some people will have a response, I do, to the nitrites that are used to cure bacon.
Oh, that's interesting.
I eat bacon that's not nitrite cured, and I'm fine. But if I have just a little bit of it, but other people will point out that broccoli's got the same amount of nitrites in it as the bacon. Why don't you respond to that? And some people do. Other people, ice cream is good for you. Today there was a New Scientist article about how great dark chocolate is. And I've been telling everybody this for years, you know. And now the price has gone up fourfold. I'm wishing I hadn't. I'm wishing I said, no, it's really bad for you. Stop eating chocolate. There'll be more
That's
for
right.
me.
That's
But
right.
coming to Dianetics itself, firstly, yes, L. Ron Hubbard in 1948 said he wanted to start a religion. The way to make $1 million is to start a religion. Russell and I found 4 people who he'd said it to. Sarah Northrup was a 5th. Frank Gruber in Pulp Jungle talks about Hubbard sitting and saying, you want to make $1 million, start a religion. Scientology, of course, said no. George Orwell said it. And you go, oh, yeah, you can't repeat what somebody's already said, can you? I didn't realize there's a law for you.
Yeah, especially Hubbard. He would never repeat what somebody else said.
No.
And call it his own thought. He would never do that.
The price of freedom is constant alertness, constant willingness to fight back. It's in the technical dictionary. If you change the word alertness to vigilance, you get George Washington.
Bingo. That's right. That's right. Oh, well. That's what I'm talking about.
January 49, he writes to his literary agent, Forry Ackerman, Forry, who he's had for 10 years. Brilliant man, lovely man. And writes him this letter, which Tony's put it up on the bunker. I had it, Forry gave me all of the letters, so that there are some great things in there. But in it, he says he's come across this technique where you can rape women without them even knowing it. You can sell them the Arroyo Seco Parkway, which I had to look up, the dry river in
That's
LA.
Where I grew up, by the way.
Hey, in the Arroyo Seco Parkway. Oh, and Hubbard had sold it to you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. But he's basically saying you can con people, you can rape women. There isn't any mention in that letter of helping anybody.
Not one.
About how much money you can make.
That's right. It is absolutely like I've hit pay dirt. I've got the gold. Here it is. Here's how I'm going to capture the souls of people. It's that kind of I mean, read it. You'll see what we're talking about. Yeah.
And 1 year forward, so that's January 49. He, by the way, is staying with his guru at the time in Savannah, Georgia, which is Arthur J. Burks, who was a major in the Marines, who seems to have been a perfectly affable lunatic, you know, an amiable and pleasant. Yeah, there are those kind of cults and gurus too. He'd written even more pulp stories than Hubbard. He published 800 stories. Wrote a fascinating autobiography called Monitors, which talks about the redhead, Ron Hubbard, talks about the Empress, Ron Hubbard's guardian. So we are finding out that, yes, Hubbard is very much involved with Crowleyite views when he starts. roll
And
forward.
Burks is the one who also gave a rundown on Excalibur. One of the very few people who read it and then talked about what's in it. I mean, he's one of the only sources, and probably one of the more prolific ones, because he wrote, paragraphs and paragraphs about the Excalibur book. We can't find that damn book. Apparently, it's it's up in gold archives. But
Jerry Armstrong said he had 4 versions of it, and I remember Martin Samuels, who was the biggest of the mission holders and the founder of Delphi and all of that, that he in testimony said he'd read it, and Hubbard was saying people commit suicides after they read it. And he said, well, I'd show it to my 4-year-old without being bothered. And it's fundamentally saying that he's discovered that Darwin was right, that things that exist are trying to exist.
That's right.
Thank you so much for that. You roll on to January 1950, and he's in Bayhead, New Jersey. Not a bad place to be. And he's got Dr. Joseph Winter with him.
Yep.
He's got Don H. Rogers with him. And he's got Sarah, she didn't know that the marriage was bigamous. I had no second wife.
That's right.
And when I dedicated the book Science of Survival to Alexis Valerie Hubbard, she wasn't really my daughter, but there we go. Some contradictions. When I was in touch with Don Rogers, Don was on the board of the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation at Elizabeth. He was on the board of every other Hubbard Foundation till 1954, and there are a few of them. So he was Wichita, Kansas, Phoenix, Philadelphia, Washington.
That's right.
And then he left because his case was cracked. So 30 years later, I'm talking to this guy, and he's saying, yeah, I felt I didn't need to do any more of it. But, so he had no axe to grind with Hubbard. He had nothing negative to say about Hubbard. But he did point out that when Art Sepos at Hermitage House, convinced by a session from Hubbard, decided to commission Dianetics, the mental science of modern health, that Hubbard turned to Don Rogers and said, we're going to have to drop the deep trance and find another method. Yeah. And so the 273 cases that he talks about in Modern Science of Mental Health, not one of whom has ever come forward, but the 273 research cases, there were, in fact, probably about 40. That's what I can estimate from that year. And that included himself, Sarah, John Campbell, Art Sepos, Joe Winter, what have you. There were about 40. And he used deep trance on all of them. Yeah. And he then switches. And you've got this funny thing so there was no research for the Dianetic method beyond what Joseph Breuer had done to screw up Anna Fourneau in the 1890s. There was research.
And let's be clear that Hubbard himself, and I can't remember the name of the lecture, but there was a lecture that I never forgot that Hubbard specifically said, I am a terrible lab man.
Yeah.
I don't keep good notes. I don't do all the scientific stuff. He just is a crap ass scientist. The idea that, that Hubbard was fully professional, as the church likes to say, in, these 20 different professions, and one of them being, sort of philosopher king, it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Hubbard even admitted he was a horrible scientist and he failed out of college on the science stuff. So it's not like he has any pedigree or background to fall back on with any of this. He was just a bad autodidact as well as a bad student.
Yeah, I mean, and he admitted that he was thrown out of college for deficiencies in scholarship in a lecture of the 23rd of September, 1950, called Introduction to Dianetics. He says in there that he failed his course, which is exactly what his grade sheets from George Washington show. He failed the only course in atomic and molecular physics that he took. He never took a course in nuclear physics. And for anybody who's looked at that, nuclear physics is quite different from atomic and molecular. This is where things get hinky, and the subject, doesn't really exist. It's only with the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, Schrödinger, Heisenberg and Niels Bohr in the late 20s, that people are even talking about this. So there were no college courses. He didn't do one. But he fails for deficiency in scholarship. And the course he's doing is meant to be majoring in civil engineering. when it comes to his research, he admits it frequently that there is only one person he's usually researching on, and that's him.
Exactly. Trying to figure out his own crap.
Yeah, I working on this new book, I got into the Marcabians and all that stuff, which is something I've ignored ever since Captain Bill told me about them. And I knew Captain Bill quite well. For about 8 months, he hung out in East Grinstead, and I got to know him. And he was desperate to try and talk me back into Scientology. So we spent some time together. But I'd stopped reading his sector operations bulletins, or SOBs, as I like to think of them. I'd stopped reading them because I knew he was mad. And so so in preparing this book, I went back to them because I'd discovered that, in fact, the Marcabian story is the essential story of Scientology. Scientology, according to Ron Hubbard, is all about stopping the Marcabian invasion, which is the second coming of Christ. And you go, what? So, well worth a book. There's this Captain Bill thing.
I look forward to that book, John.
You shall have it soon.
Yes.
Captain Bill gets into this argument as to the scientific veracity of the dating of the Chicxulub, or whatever it's called, meteorite strike that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs in what is now called the Gulf of America.
Yes.
It used to be called the Gulf of, we don't know what, because we haven't got language yet. Because
oh my God,
66 million years ago. Mm-hmm. And Bill puts forward this argument where he says, no, it was 75 million years ago. The radiocarbon dating is wrong because L. Ron Hubbard used an E-meter to date the incident.
I'm telling you that if you think that we're joking, seriously, an E-meter is more legit to Scientologists than all of carbon dating science going back decades, right? Yeah. Or organic testing of material in order to determine its age, right? Like this is a very scientific process, very worked out. Hubbard writes it all off in one
the decay of
one
carbon-14 is irrelevant. The clock decay of carbon, who cares about that? And the fact that it's been checked against dendrochronology and other dating methods, and we now have pretty refined. No, it's all down to L. Ron Hubbard's imagination. And in terms of his research, there's that wonderful LSD years after they have come off LSD, in which he says, on research into 2 cases, I have discovered that people who've taken LSD are stupid. Now, one of those 2 cases was Harvey Haber, who I interviewed. And he said, he was pissed off with me and he was pissed off with this woman. So he said, find out what's common between them. They've both taken LSD, therefore LSD this. Well, just one cotton picking minute. David Mayo, in conversations with Ron Hubbard, and David would never tell me anything that Hubbard had said in session, but in conversations, Hubbard said to him, I've taken LSD. And I got a letter from somebody whose guru in one of these little California groups had taken LSD with L. Ron Hubbard. So you're going, so L. Ron Hubbard is 1, stupid. But Hubbard saying my research was of 2 people.
Hubbard was nothing if not consistent in labeling everybody around him with his own deficiencies. I mean, if you read, just as a brief aside, if you read through Hubbard's characteristics of an antisocial personality, he is literally describing himself. To a T. It's just, you just can't get away from it. It's an inevitable conclusion of studying this stuff that you see Hubbard accusing people over and over and over the decades of what he himself is suffering from or doing.
I used to keep a picture cut from the Auditor magazine for years. I had it by the side of my computer. And it was a picture of Hubbard doing this. And it said underneath it, the criminal accuses others of things he himself is doing.
There it is. Exactly.
So
exactly.
Freud was right about projection. We'll give
him that one.
We'll give him 1 on the tally.
That's
for that.
Right.
But so he devises this method, and there are some great reviews of it. Tony put out the physicist Rabi's wonderful brief review of it. More nonsense per square inch than anything since the Gutenberg press was invented. But I went back to Tony. I don't know if he's put it up, but 10 years ago, we put up Hayakawa's critique, which is where he takes it apart completely, and you've got nothing left.
Tony did post that. I remember that.
Yeah. He posted it a few years ago. I don't know if he's posted it again this week, but
right.
I did mark in red the bits that I thought were the best fun.
It was blistering, absolutely blistering.
Yeah, and you've got somebody. I mean, because Dianetics, it has various references. The ethics comes from cybernetics, which had become very popular. The Diane probably comes from the worship of Diana, Hathor, which is a little bit bad. But inside it, you have these ideas that are, so you have a reactive mind and as you say, a somatic mind, which is something that's completely forgotten these days. But that's probably the genetic entity or the id or the, what do the Sufis call it? The nafs, the commanding self that lives in the belly. It's probably that. And you've got this incredible structure of the mind. I mean, Don Rogers' Mind Schematic was published as an appendix to Dianetics right into the 1980s. And Joe Winter's introduction was in the first edition, but after he wrote Dianetics, a Doctor's Report, because Art Ceppos withdrew the book before the end of the year, it had sold 150,000 copies. It was doing very well. And Ceppos, who'd published it, went, this is fraudulent. So he commissioned Joe Winter to write a book showing that maybe there was some usefulness in the Dianetic therapy, but that Hubbard was a con artist.
Yep.
And, that first year, the amount of, Sarah gives this description of, I think it was a Pontiac, that he bought her a brand new car with the money he pulled out of his pocket for the bankroll, which of course he'd lifted from the till in the Dianetic Foundation. All 5 of them went bankrupt,
That's right. That's right. It would have died on its own if left to Hubbard.
Yeah.
It really was a product of enabling in a lot of ways, because Hubbard got a lot of help over the years from a lot of people, well-intentioned people who came and went into Hubbard's orbit. And unfortunately, this is what we see with predatory personalities like Hubbard, is that they navigate the world by sort of, for brief periods of time, pulling people in who believe this is somebody who deserves help, who deserves a support, who should be even financially supported. And they lift up people like Hubbard only to be run over, when he leaves them in the dust. That's sort of his pattern.
Yeah, vampirism. And they will suck the last drop out of people. When I left Scientology because I was being told that my friend Ira Chalef was suppressive. And I just went, this isn't true. Putting his name on a list isn't enough. And I spent 6 months doing what you meant to do, writing to the right terminal. Let's depersonalize here. So I went to the Continental Justice Chief, the International Justice Chief, and ultimately I remember writing this letter to L. Ron Hubbard. And it started out something like, I know that L. Ron Hubbard does not receive the letters addressed to him. However, this is the last recourse. And the response was something like, your letter is on my desk, and of course I read my letters. It's like, but I'm not going to do anything in response to it. And so I kind of left. And Ira, bless him, for 6 months had refused to communicate with me in case I was declared suppressive. So eventually, I think he was over in New York at the time, and I got hold of him and I said, look, I want to know what actually happened. What on earth is going on? And he said, all right, talk to Ron Hopkins, who was the commanding officer UK for a while. Hoppy is a good guy. He'll tell you what happened. And it started this process in me where I wanted to find anybody who'd been declared SP. So I found Cyril Vosper, I found John McMaster, I found Otto Rose, I found lots of people, and they were really nice. Well, I'm not sure that Otto was really nice, but he was really nice to me over the years I knew him,
Yes.
And a lot of the stories that actually belonged to Baron Berez were transferred over to Otto, I think. But Otto was a hard guy, but I always got on with him well. But it was that thing of find the SPs, and that led me into this thing of going exactly what you've just said, that there were these people who gave him everything that they had and then were thrown aside.
That's right.
You know, John McMaster was literally, he was the world's first real clear. And he traveled the world with his secretary, Colin. And he was Scientology's ambassador to the United Nations and all of this stuff. And everybody loved him. I mean, the buzz around John, I came in after he was gone, a couple of years after he left. But anybody who'd met him just adored him. He got this. So when I got to know him, it was a little bit shocking that he wasn't very adorable in my experience. But nonetheless, there he was, this SP, and he was aboard the ship and he was thrown overboard, as was the common practice, because Dianetics relieves trauma, and we're here to, to relieve trauma. So, we've got to cause some of it. Let's chuck them overboard. Into the sewage at Corfu Harbour, human sewage in Corfu Harbour, most of the overboardings, original ones, as photographed by L. Ron Hubbard and published in Auditor 41.
Gleefully photographed. He loved watching the punishments being dished out. Yeah. He really got off on it. It's pretty perverse where Hubbard was coming from.
John said he was in the water for 2 hours and he'd broken his collarbone.
Believe that?
So he had 2 hours of very nearly drowning with nobody listening to him, nobody paying any attention. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of suicides, I did a thing for FactNet back in 93 where I researched 38 suicides in Scientology. And
wow.
The suicide rate in Scientology, by my reckoning at that time, was 10 times the US or UK average. It was really shocking. But some of those people, like John Neugebauer, for example, his partner, Helen O'Brien, was the head of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists. She ran the Philadelphia doctorate course, and the 38 people that were on it all dealt with her. Neugebauer had, at the end of during the closing months of World War II, his job was driving a bulldozer to push the corpses into the trenches. And he was extraordinarily traumatized.
Oh, the worst
and
job.
Hubbard promised him that he could cure him. That eventuated in suicide. Dick Halpin. You find these people who, they gave him everything.
Yep.
And he sucked everything out of them.
Yep.
And then they were cast aside. Otto Rose. Otto, during Hubbard's periodic sicknesses, he'd have bronchitis, bronchial pneumonia, because he smoked 100 cigarettes a day. You don't need body thetans to work this one out. But year on, year out, he would have this, the David Mayo doing the OT5, the new era Dianetics for OTs. That's about Hubbard getting so sick. The rest of us, we get sick, it's because of our, psychological our aberration and what have you. Hubbard does it because of his research, or the 100 cigarettes a day, depending which view you take. But Otto got hold of every last scrap of paper of Hubbard's auditing. He said he got envelopes, he got all sorts of stuff. He got it all together, he sorted it all out, he went through it. And there was this whole thing about the rock slam, this thing where the needle goes mad on the dial. And if you want to find one of the many fundamental misunderstoods of Scientologists, ask them what the word rock means in rock slam.
That's right. That's right. They won't be able to tell you.
Yeah, we know, and we're not going to tell you. So you're going to have an MU. So originally it was meant to find this basic incident upon which all your problems are based from the 1960s, which disappeared. It's actually the carbon potentiometer in the meter giving off dust and the meter reacting to itself. I saw them doing it with no
broken e-meter, folks. Broken e-meter.
That's all it was. Hubbard decided that it indicated evil purposes. And so when Otto Rose said, "I've been through your folders, sir, and I found 200 rock slams," he found himself standing on the quay with $5 in his hand and his passport, having been one of only 5 Class 12s trained by Hubbard, having been the only person who'd done the highest level OT8 under Hubbard's supervision. He was thrown out. And that happened. You're kind of going, so why is it that anybody that gets close to Hubbard gets canned? Even Mary Sue Hubbard. You know, he refused to talk to her in the end because she'd taken the rap for him. She went to prison so he wouldn't have to. and he wouldn't communicate with her again. So kind of odd for the savior of mankind, really. But
makes you wonder. In fact, I think we've covered, I think we've given some anniversary treatment to Dianetics here in an appropriate light. And
happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary, Dianetics. That's right. This is how it should be being talked about, and I can't help, being the kind of educating kind of guy that I am. I am struggling recently, since last November, in trying to tie or connect the dots between somebody like a Hubbard and all the things that we've said in this entire show so far, all the characteristics that we've kind of been breaking down of using people, the vampirism, the attention seeking, the megalomania, the solipsism, narcissism, right? That all of those things are inherent in Hubbard. We see it from childhood forward. We see it before corrupting influences or even in Hubbard's life.
As a teenager,
Yeah, as teenager, we see patterns of this behavior, right? It's just kind of who the guy was. And we can, and the thing I wanted to talk about today is not the origin story of that. We've dived down that rabbit hole a few times as far as, is it nature, nurture, is it this, is it that? We still come up empty and solid answers on those questions. We have a lot of conjecture. But what we don't have to conjecture about are the connections between or ties or characteristics of somebody like an L. Ron Hubbard, like a Keith Raniere, and somebody like a Donald Trump. And this is where I struggle to connect dots. And I'm just going to go there today, folks, because I wanted to poke Jon's about this. I wanted to see what Jon's views about this were, right? Because we haven't talked in a while. And we're now into this administration, which is having global impact. It's undeniable that Donald Trump touches everybody's lives because he's the president and because of the decisions that he's making now, that are being driven by lots of other enablers and decision makers and policy writers. And it's not all Donald Trump. I don't imagine for a second he's some criminal mastermind or something, but his personality type has characteristics that are disturbing to me. I find them disturbing. Yeah. I find them similar to L. Ron Hubbard in many ways, and I am sometimes put out or confused by the fact that it's not more obvious to other people. And so, having laid all this out the way we have today, and I'm leading this in this direction. We weren't like trying to do some setup here where we're going to describe Hubbard and then we're going to do a switcheroo and it's going to be Trump. It's just, it is that way. You don't have to do a setup. The characteristics are all there. And so what I struggle with is, how do I make this more obvious to people? And I thought, Jon, I would ask you. I mean, how do you approach this or talk about this with people, or how do you see it?
Yeah, well, thank you. The little thing behind me there, the book Opening Our Minds, is about this, and the first edition of it was published 10 years ago. So and it opens with the human predator and a description, because in the 80s, when I was trying to understand Hubbard's personality, I spoke with various mental health professionals to get their view. And I read Hervey Cleckley's what's the Mask of Sanity, which is the first text out of which the idea of psychopathy comes, a 1940s text. And quite evidently, Hubbard had looked at it before writing his antisocial personality traits. Interesting that he uses a psychiatric term, antisocial personality, and then gets confused. He calls us SPs, meaning social personalities, not ASPs. So,
good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So I am an SP. You're quite right. A highly social personality. And I understood it the best I could. And I wrote Blue Sky, and that came up. And then over the years, I kept going back to Robert Hare's work. The Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised is still used throughout the world
That's the sociopath next door, right? From that book? Was that Hare, or was that? Am I confusing that?
Without Conscience and Snakes in Suits are Hare, Hare and Babiek for Snakes in Suits. And interestingly, he changes his definition in the 10 years between those two books. So that initially he says a psychopath, that comes from those of us who believe it's inborn, and a sociopath, that's from those who believe it's nurture. And
that's right.
He then
I was confusing it with Martha Stout. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, and I absolutely do not recommend Martha Stout's work.
Yeah, sorry.
Her work on dissociative identity disorder, where she says we all have it, is ludicrous. So
we do not all have dissociative identity disorder. That is true. We do not.
Well, I don't. I think the rest of you do, but
yeah. My solipsism says you guys are the ones who have it, not me.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to look at the various different unpleasant types of human being and how they were defined. So the malignant narcissist, as Fromm called it, now called narcissistic personality disorder. The antisocial personality disorder, of course, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, Volume 5, does not have sociopath or psychopath in it, but they are designations that are commonly used. So
with
I read
lots of varied definitions out there, so you got to really make sure when you're reading stuff about this that you're clear on where this author is coming from. At this point, that's the only responsible way to engage with those words, right?
Yes, I agree that that it is a case where we have to define our terms before we go any further. And I looked at it and said, in the US, you've got the wonderful Barry Goldwater rule, where psychiatrists are not allowed to say anything that's publicly helpful about public figures, because that would be awful. And I did have the pleasure of having Bandy Lee brief,
ask Bandy about that. Yeah,
she is absolutely incredible. She was thrown out of Yale University and kicked out of the APA for saying, there's something we should be worried about here. And it's like you think about Cassandra and the Trojan horse, and you're going, what happened to Cassandra? She got chucked off the cliff. And what happened to the Trojan horse? It destroyed the Trojan people. So sometimes it's a good idea to listen to people who are trying to warn us.
Yes.
But so I read that as well, Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And I wanted to say, well, I'm not interested in diagnosing, are they a borderline? Are they, this is an aspect of bipolar disorder? Or is it cluster B? Or is it? It was like, what is it that I'm interested in? What I'm interested in, they're predators.
That's right.
And I started to use the label human predator and put together, if people go to my website, which is, or one of my websites, jonatack.co.uk, then they can get a free fridge poster to print out, which has the characteristics of such people. It is incredible. These very simple characteristics are not taught in our schools and colleges, because you can actually recognize such people. And there are variations between types. So, for example, if you're dealing with a psychopath in Robert Hare's, Robert Hare has a 40, you can get 40 points maximum on his scale. If you score from 0 to 4, then you're probably okay. Have some bad days. If you score from 4 to 30, you're what he calls a sociopath. Sociopaths can have feelings for others. If you score from 30 to 40, you are a psychopath. So I tend to think of the criminal psychopath in that context, because they're people who are completely without conscience. They have no remorse whatsoever.
Right.
Hubbard certainly did not show any remorse. He did, when he was told that his son Quentin had killed himself, he said, that's more bad PR for us. He's got us into trouble again.
That's right.
But, how your own child, that's impossible.
Now, wasn't his first reaction something about what has he done to me now, or some bullshit like that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Hubbard's
it was always all about him.
It's more black PR for Scientology or something.
Some bullshit. Everything about Hubbard was all about Hubbard's greatness.
So I would differentiate, and I would say, we both have this thing. I lost subscribers last year because in the run-up to the election, I started saying, look at these things. Do you want JD Vance to become president if Trump falls down?
Right.
And it shocked me. The responses I got were a lot of, I'm going to vote Republican. And it's like, yeah, well, that's fine. I'm not, this isn't a problem I'm having with the Republicans, though I must say I do now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you've got to suck up Congress, which is
That's
not
right.
meant, it's meant to be there to be in charge of,
That's
of
right.
legislation. And what happens, the executive office is taken over all the functions of Congress. So
That's right.
I was very surprised by what you're very surprised by. But let me roll back to when I left Scientology. And when I realized that Ron Hubbard was a liar, and it was undeniable because he contradicted his own statements. The classic one, which I always use, is my philosophy, which was handwritten. It was on display at St. Hill. And he talked about being crippled and blinded with physical injuries to hip and back, not those psychological injuries that other people, con men, get. Physical injuries, hip and back. It was not true. He'd hurt himself falling down a ship's ladder. That was his war wound.
Right.
So there he is, crippled and blinded, abandoned by family and friends, this, that, and the other. But then you go back to the Professional Auditors Bulletin, Communication and Isness, and he said, the last year of the war I was in hospital and all of this, crippled and blinded. Then in this Communication and Isness, he says, it was July 25th, 1945, I was feeling sorry for myself because I'd been denied overseas service. Not really. That's why he'd gone to Oaknoll, to avoid being sent to Korea. That's the truth of it, because the Japanese were fighting to the end, and he didn't want any of that. So he pretended to have ulcers. It has often been repeated that what he had wrong with him was ulcers. There was never any proof. There were x-rays in his files that say they never found an ulcer crater when they were looking for them. So even that may have been a made-up story. And of course, his eyesight was what prevented him. Yeah, he had pink eye, yeah. But his deteriorating eyesight, he never had good eyesight. The eye tests at the beginning when he enlisted in the Navy, trying to get a job in public relations, so he could be ashore and not get into any trouble. His eyesight that prevented him from joining the Navy, and he was put on the reserve list because his eyesight wasn't good enough to be in the Navy. How he got a sharpshooter's badge when he was 16, we'll never know. I imagine money changed hands.
Mm-hmm.
But so you've got him clearly saying that on July the 25th, he was in Hollywood and he beat up 3 petty officers. So crippled and blinded, beat up 3 petty. I had somebody explain to me that this was because his necessity level came up so high that he was able to do it. And I said, yeah, but he said he got injured optic nerves. And he then, of course, claimed a pension for the rest of his life from the Veterans Administration. He only got $38 a month, but every penny counts.
He fought hard for that VA pension in the early days when he was a broke ass author, not writing books and parading around in Pasadena, messing with the occult and Jack Parsons' girlfriend. He was begging the VA for money. I mean, begging. You can see it in the letters. He was desperate.
Yeah, I mean, one of the letters I print in full in Cult of Greed, Scientology Cult of Greed, is his 1947 letter. This is a request for treatment, asking for psychiatric treatment. Would that he'd got it.
Yeah, exactly.
The point was that I realized that he was a liar and there were no two ways around it. And then having somebody say, well, yeah, he cured his injured optic nerves and then uncured them through his necessity level. It's like, you people really want to believe. What shocked me was a specific conversation I had. I was just, I hadn't left I'd left the mother cult. I was at the middle of the creation of the independent movement, very much at the dead center of the thing, protecting the independents from the harassment from the mother cult for the most part in their legal stuff and all of that. And I had a conversation with Vicky Ballard, a delightful woman who'd been the commanding officer of St. Hill Foundation. And I said, look, he says here he was crippled and blinded. He says here that he beat up 3 petty officers using judo and put a bottle in one of them's face. And she just looked at me and said, he had 2 bodies. Now, this is the answer to the Donald Trump problem.
Yep.
He has 2 bodies.
Yep.
And that we attach ourselves to certainty. We have this feeling of knowledge. We know something is true. You've heard me tell a story, so I'll shorthand it. This guy, born-again guy, as he backed away from me after 2 hours of conversation, I was polite to him. I wasn't going to leap on his back. But he backed away from me and he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. I was 17 when that happened, and it was a very useful lesson. I don't know, but I do. I don't understand, but I do know. We all live that way. Every one of us, there are the things we are sure of that are based on feelings of knowing. Right. William James, in The Varieties of Religious Experience, that incredible, wonderful book, puts forward, he calls it noesis. And so learning, if we're going to grow up, we have to get evidence. This is stuff we check, and we're willing to change our minds about with new evidence and new interpretations. And we can get into stories about how, the human character has been reinterpreted by evidence. Raymond Dart in 1925 with the Dow baby is a world celebrity. He's at Witwatersrand, what a great word, university, and he's been to Schwarzkranz. I love this. The Afrikaans is just, he's found these skulls, hominid skulls, and they've got penetrated marks, and he's got the tusks that had been used to do this. And he puts forward this thing that goes all around the world, influences all of human science, with the idea that they were being butchered by other human beings who'd got these things. And we are really fundamentally aggressive. Konrad Lorenz, the famous Nazi professor who eventually did have his prizes stripped away from him in the 70s, puts forward this idea of aggression, and this is what we are. This is where we are. We're vicious, angry beasts. A guy called Bob Brain, who was also at Witwatersrand and had the chair in the 1970s, got out these same tusks and had them looked at using an electron microscope. And he had his students go out and dig up roots. And they found that these tusks had been used to dig up roots. They also found, and this one was a bit of an oversight, that there would not just be one hole in the hominid skull, there'd be 2, because they'd been attacked by the animal while it still had the tusks. So you've got a piece of evidence that can be reinterpreted. We need to be able to do that. But we also, for sure, need to stop believing bullshit and kind of going, this is true because it feels true. The last 9 months, I've been through so much of Hitler and Himmler, Rosenberg, Heydrich, all of these leaders of the Nazi Party and the bullshit they spread, and trace down Aryan race theory, because that's the killer, that they came to believe they were Übermensch. And they were superior to others because they were Nordic, they were Teutons. And what I hope to prove as one of the small elements of the book is that they thoroughly disproved that. They did so much work on skull measurement. They measured calf muscles. They took casts of ears. They did blood typing. They took fingerprints. They did all sorts of utterly horrific things to other human beings to make these measurements. And in the end, when they added it all together, they couldn't tell the difference between the 2 pure races, the Nordic and Mediterranean races, and they found that 11.7% of Jews had blue eyes and fair hair and pale skin. And in fact, in the last days of his life, Hitler admitted that there was no such thing as the Jewish race. And this is something he said that should have been promulgated, that they disproved their own idiotic theory. Now, of course, with genetics, we can prove absolutely we're all really closely connected.
That's right. The idea of race is a construct that has been rooted in so much bullshit for so many millennia, and it's always been an excuse to divide and conquer. And that's all it adds up to. And it's really quite something to make a statement like that. But I do. It's dumbfounding that we have founded so much of our behavior over the millennia on such utter bullshit.
Well, and skin color is a much more modern thing that you can actually date it to 1676.
That's right.
Bacon's Rebellion, where black slaves, African American slaves, got together with white indentured British servants. In fact, they'd have been English servants this time because we didn't have the union with Scotland, and rebelled. And for 3 months, they fought against. And the way of solving that problem was what Du Bois, the brilliant black American anthropologist, called the religion of whiteness. Because, and you start getting these things, you might as well measure ear shape. And so we could have Kirkians and Spockians.
That's right.
You know, or you might as well, measure the size of the big toe.
And this comes down to social science showing, because we have done, there are experiments out there with kids and adults of divide on anything, divide on eye color, divide on skins versus shirts. Yeah. Whatever point you want to make the division on, it actually doesn't matter to the psychology of what happens, right? We split and it's us and it's them. Yeah. And the second that happens, it sounds like a slippery slope argument, and in a way it is, but at the same time, it's observable behavior that once you introduce that, atrocities are potentially capable, right, of happening. It goes in that direction very quickly.
Yeah, absurd ideas readily lead to atrocious behaviors, which is the hypothesis I've worked with in this book. Yeah. And I've got some pretty absurd ideas in it. We do come to this point where our willingness to believe things. So I tried to have dialogue with people who were Trumpista. Yeah. I was even told off for using Trumpomaniac and going, well, but it was Hulk Hogan at Republican convention who used that term. Why is it objectionable when I use it? And the pushback was not, well, here are the reasons why I admire Donald Trump. I mean, it's like the thing with the tariffs, when the tariffs came on and Lutnick and all these people are coming out saying, you see, it's the art of the deal. I can't remember whether it was, I think it was Jon Stewart who said, yeah, here's the art of the deal. Chapter 9, how to run a casino.
Exactly.
This guy had
into the ground.
The highest paying casino in the world, $1 million a day coming in Atlantic City. And what did he do as a brilliant businessman? He set up 2 competing casinos in the same place. And then his dad bailed him out, It's like...
Exactly. It's how do you bankrupt a casino? Well, somehow he figured out how to do that.
Yeah, it's the house.
It's failure on the order of L. Ron Hubbard failure. It's catastrophic failure. It's failure that results in people's lives being messed up.
But it pushes us into the meaning of charisma that L. Ron Hubbard, from talking to people who knew him, doesn't actually seem to have been very charismatic. He seems to have been quite off-putting. And yet, when you say with Hannah Whitfield, when the C Project, the original thing, how mesmerized they were by these stories about these 3, in the last 1.25 quadrillion years, we've had Helatrobus, Marcabian, Arslicus, and that's all that seems to have happened. It's like in the last couple of thousand years on this planet, we've had many civilizations, but, apparently it was quite simple. But there was something personable about him. There was something that attracted people to him. Mm-hmm. But he was a horrible, predatory human being. I can see it's more the followers than the leaders. Ira Chalef, in his How to Stop a Tyrant, is his last book. Courageous followership is the thing he came up with. And of course, he worked directly with Hubbard. This is and he has admitted it publicly, but he's not proud of it. And it's not going to sell him more copies of the book. But that was the object lesson he had remember, I've known Iris since 1977. We're good friends, and he's an amazing character, and he typifies a type of character. Mike Rinder, Hannah Whitfield. They're weaponized empaths.
That's it.
They're deeply empathetic people who kind of go, oh, the whole agonized future of every man, woman, and child depends on what we do here. And why is it going to be agonized? So I don't understand. Why isn't it the whole pleasant future depends on what we do now? I don't want an agonized future, but at least he was telling the truth about that if Scientology takes over. But how do we follow? And what is it about us that does fall into line, so that rather than having a reasoned discussion about something, and I've seen this on both sides, I really don't have any truck with Chuck Schumer, with Nancy Pelosi,
Agreed.
with Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Yep.
Bill Clinton introduced extraordinary rendition, the sending of innocent people, not proven guilty by any court, to be tortured.
That's right. And it's just a gross atrocity. There's no other word for it. There's no rationalization for it. There's no excuse for it. And what color flag you're flying while you're doing it doesn't remove the stain of human abuse and suffering that you are creating by doing that. It's gross behavior, and I don't care what flag is flying while it's happening. It's just not right. Any more than I agree with killing kids in the name of freedom for somebody. It's just, you just lose the plot at that point.
Yeah.
And that's where America has gone in a lot of ways, and I acknowledge all of those things. But, to then go to a place where we're at now, where we're embracing, authoritarian megalomania, is a bridge too far, so to speak, right? It's just too much. And I can't cope with the fact that there are regular American people who are buying into this. And all the things we're saying feature into why this is happening. But please continue. I just needed to say that out loud because it's just too frustrating to live in the middle of this, to live in times where you feel like you were asked the question the whole time you were growing up. You were always asked, what would you do? What would you do if you lived in Nazi Germany? What would you do if you lived in fascist Italy, in imperial Japan? What would you have done? Well, I can't help but feel that we're living in those times now, and I can't help but ask myself that question almost every day. What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? And this is where the impetus for me to have these conversations comes from, is I'm not sure about any sort of future. We have no idea what's going to happen, but I am concerned about all the red flags flying around me right now. And that's what, anyway, I just needed to say that. So please, Jon, continue.
No, and I think it's important that we do say that.
Yeah.
That I perhaps have a slightly different view of history to most people, because history is the history of authoritarianism. Human history, and there are exceptions. I mean, everybody should read Graeber and Wengrow. Where's it gone? The Dawn of Everything. This is a mind-changing view of humanity written by an anthropologist and an archaeologist over a period of 10 years. And they considered everything we know about prehistoric cultures. And they demonstrate, they take on people like Jared Diamond, Yuval Harari, who have this very kind of deterministic view, Richard Dawkins, and say, no, you don't know enough about history. You don't understand that there isn't just capitalism or communism.
That's right.
That there have been many societies, and they talk about the influence of the Huron peoples upon the Enlightenment in Europe, which is Kondiaronk, who was a Huron, came to Europe, and Rousseau repeats his ideas. He hasn't understood them thoroughly. Rousseau abandoned his own children, so he obviously hadn't understood them. But the Huron as with many other American people, and yeah, America for the Americans. Yeah, the Huron, the Iroquois, the Cherokee, the Navajo, the Americans, right? Not these immigrants.
That's
Build a
right.
wall, put
That's
them in the
right.
sea.
These colonists.
But the Hurons had this Huron people had this particular concern, which was shared by many other Native Americans, that Europeans hated each other. They had no sense of friendship for one another because, of course, they were seeing the military end and the traders. So they were seeing the merchant capitalists and the military end. And the Huron explained that they loved everybody who was a Huron. That was their family. They would then savagely torture anybody else, which is also true of the Iroquois and the Cherokee. But nonetheless, they had ideas. Again, I think many people are not aware that it's the Iroquois who give certain basic ideas to the American Constitution, that when the 5 tribes buried the hatchet and decided that they would stop killing each other and they'd go and kill the Algonquin and the Huron instead, but they brought certain ideas, or that the Cherokee, they went through an amazing evolution. The first conversation with the Cherokee that's recorded is, "We live to make war." And the next time somebody tells me patriarchy is the problem, I'd just like to point out they were a matriarchy. So were the Iroquois. And their purpose was to wage war. So, Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, Golda Meir, the Dowager Empress. There have been a lot of women who had too much testosterone too.
It's true, folks. I'm sorry, but I'm nodding because it's true. You just can't. You got to stop thinking of the world in these really simple ways. It's not accurate. There's a lot of things that cause us to do what we do.
Yeah, and as we've said before in a conversation, there was a civilization for 700 years in what is now Pakistan, the Indus Valley, that did not fight wars. Yep. That did not have kings, that did not have priests. There appear to be no temples. They lived peacefully. So it shows it can be done. And so I think, let's Donald Trump in the context of America. My question when he first was standing was, when was America great? I'm not being controversial. I'm kind of going, what's he trying to turn the clock back to? Because I know about golden age psychology. Churchill used it. Thatcher used it. There wasn't a golden age. And he's finally said it. In January, he said that it was between, and he gave precise dates, 1870 and 1913. So during the period of Reconstruction, which was mayhem, which overturned all of the civil rights that should have been granted to the black population and maintained racism against it
was a horrible
Latinos.
time. The Reconstruction was a disaster.
Yeah.
And we are still suffering from the consequences of the greed, the rampant criminality of that time period. And I'm not trying to lay too broad a brush. There were a lot of good people with a lot of good intentions, but the corruption and the greed and the hate that was not dealt with, the cultural clash that was not dealt with, right? The deaths, the violence that was not dealt with. The Reconstruction was anything but reconstructive. Yeah, just putting it out there.
Yeah, it was a complete an absolute mess, and it left us with the Lost Cause and the Bloody Shirt, these two factions. At the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1913, Woodrow Wilson holds this event with 5,000 veterans who come together at Gettysburg, and they make a tent city, and they shake hands over the wall and all of this. There was not a single black veteran there of the, 180,000 who fought on the side of the North.
So many.
So what was it actually about? It was about federalism. So if we then, the other thing that's significant to my new book is eugenics, because that's what comes out of Aryan race theory. And of course, we all know that, Hitler, he actually had about 375,000 people sterilized. They deliberately, Himmler gave orders when people argue about whether Hitler knew what was happening. Well, you're the boss fish stinks from the head down, as the Germans say. You have to take responsibility. So he wasn't at the Wannsee conference, but he did talk about exterminating the Jews in Mein Kampf. So it wasn't a new idea. And indeed, you then look at the eugenics program. So they killed, Himmler ordered, under Operation Barbarossa, he ordered the killing of 30 million Slavs. And they got close. We know 20 million, maybe as many as 27 million Russians, Belarusians, Poles were killed in an extermination program so that their land could be resettled by Aryans. And they did resettle some parts, and they actually had anthroposophists farming there. But there's another story. Biodynamic agriculture and Walida projects as used by the Nazis. I'm going to get into trouble for that. I always get into trouble for that, but I don't really care because they're anthroposophists, and what are they going to do? They're not going to harass me like Scientology, are they? Let's face it. But there was this drive to do this thing. When you get into the history of it, it didn't come from Germany. It didn't come from the Nazis. In fact, it was started by the Protestant churches in Germany before the Nazis came to power. But where it actually came from was the United States. The eugenics programs that were adopted, the Nuremberg laws.
Oh, yes. I have to say that that's absolutely true. The eugenics program, definitely the concept of social Darwinism, eugenics, the entire evolution of that thought process, I believe is American. You're right. It builds on a foundation and centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe. I mean, it wasn't hard to export, but it is, I believe you're right, that it was an American concept. Yeah.
1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act. 1895, the Connecticut statute to sterilize the feeble-minded.
Yeah. And that's how it starts, is with this common sense. But we shouldn't be having the worst of us reproducing. It's a service to them, isn't it? That we're going to stop them from polluting the gene pool, this kind of thinking, this purist sort of thinking. I mean, we just can't help but connect it with the Chinese concepts of brainwashing. It's the same idea of purity. We're gonna expunge the dirty, corruptive genes from the gene pool and somehow make a better species of humans as a result. This is as old as the hills, this thinking.
It is. The Plato was very big on it. And Socrates, my childhood hero, actually says, you've got to breed the best. But Richard Dawkins, and the second time I've slagged him off today, sent out a tweet saying, well, you can do it with cows and pigs. Why can't you do it with people? And you're going, well, look at what you're breeding in cows and pigs and racehorses. You're breeding a certain look, like a pushed-in face for a dog so it can't breathe properly, or the brain case of the King Charles Spaniel, which is too small for the brain, so they go loopy, or thoroughbred racehorses, which have all sorts of diseases and problems. You are breeding for single traits. Now, I actually got into this guy here is a geneticist, Adam Rutherford, and has written a couple of quite interesting books. So he talks about the genetic basis of this and how many genes are involved, for example, with intelligence and cognition. Oh dear.
Forget about it.
The complexity of it. So this and the problem is, I'm relating this to American politics because Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Harding, Coolidge, going on to Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, LBJ, Nixon, all supported eugenics programs. So the problem,
because Eisenhower was certainly no Nazi lover. I mean, I will put that out.
No, but the original eugenics programs didn't come from the Nazis.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. And it wasn't even always thought of and called eugenics. Social Darwinism was a term that was thrown about, right, to make it, scientific and stuff. Right?
Eugenics is the English term from Sir Francis Galton, And it
That's
was
right.
already being practiced. The 1895 Connecticut law, I think, predates the use of the word good birth, eugenics. Then you have
Yeah.
euthanasia, good death.
There we go.
But
There we go.
yes, these are all presidents who actually backed policies, eugenic policies.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Gerald Ford, in 1975, Kissinger made a report on India, and he said that any aid to India should be based upon a sterilization program. And Gerald Ford went to Indira Gandhi and said, you have to do this. 10 million people were forcibly sterilized. No other country, the Chinese could perhaps compete with that a little bit in the one-child program. But so understanding that with Trump, what you see is what you get. But what we have been getting in American politics, and heck, in politics throughout the world. Boris Johnson, during the second COVID epidemic, put do not resuscitate notices on anybody with Down syndrome. That's
Oh,
eugenics. That was in,
wow.
2021.
That slipped under the cracks. Jesus.
Trump, in his first administration, had women sterilized who'd crossed the border in the camps, in the ICE camps.
Jesus Christ.
But I believe, are looking at patriarchal systems, or patrician systems, where you have plutocrats, you have people who believe that they know better than the rest of us and will subvert democracy.
Yes.
Until such time as we are educated enough to make right choices, democracy ain't going to work. And
it's a requirement. There's a trick to democracy. It has the most opportunities for personal individual freedom and expression, but it's the hardest to maintain because it requires an engaged, activated, and educated populace in order for it to work ideally over time. And unfortunately, human beings suck at keeping things maintained like that generationally, right? First generation, they're true believers. They're fully into it. They're fully committed. Second gen, third gen, by the time fourth gen comes around, what are we doing this for? What does this matter? Who cares? It doesn't matter anyway. In fact, it's bad. Let's get rid of it. And that tends to be the cycle of how people and our systems interact with each other. I've noticed this again and again and again. Good systems, bad systems, it seems to be the way.
Yeah, and so it's creating, this is a very, very new idea. I mean, when Hitler took over in Germany and got more than 90% of the population to vote him as Führer so that they would never have to vote again, get in mind that they'd only had a representative democracy since 1919. So they had less than 15 years of this system. Before that, the Kaiser had ruled with the advice of a parliament.
That's right. So because it ties in a lot with the economic issues too, right? If people feel economically desperate, as they do now here, and justified or not, that's how they feel. You can count on the fact of ideological chaos.
Sure.
In the course of that, right?
Yeah.
Just to draw more parallels between these time periods, right? It's not simply an ideological question; it's also an economic one too. These things are tied together very closely.
And there's another economic point, which if you look to the Athenian democracy, so-called, where they had slaves and women were kept indoors and veiled and what have you. But
that's right.
If we go back to Solon the Archon in 600 BC, so the beginnings of Attic or Athenian society, there is just about to be a civil war between hoipoloi, the people, and Aristos, the aristocrats. They're just about to rip each other apart, and they, between them, decide there's this one guy who can decide, and he's made the Archon. And Solon says, well, we've got a fundamental economic problem, and it's called debt slavery. You can sell your children, you can bet yourself in a wager and become a slave. We have to end debt slavery. 100 years later, the same thing happens in Rome, that they have this exact same problem Well, now we have the Billy Club, as I like to think of it, where we're being beaten by the billionaires, the Billy Club.
Right.
They are a club of billionaires. See, this
That's
works
a
in
good
many.
point. Wow, I like that. That's a good one.
And when you look back to how Hitler got into power, he was massively funded by German industrialists, and later, of course, by American industrialists. Ford. Henry Ford I've got this great picture of him being given the highest Nazi award for distributing 500,000 copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a complete and absolute forgery. Norman Cohn, in his book Warrant for Genocide in 1967, showed exactly how it was forged and by whom. The original was an attack, a tirade against Napoleon III of France, published in Switzerland. And Okhrana, the Russian secret police in Paris, rewrote it and then got the Theosophists in Russia to distribute it. There are wild stories here. But Henry Ford published and the Dearborn Chronicle, his newspaper, was the third biggest circulation newspaper. All of this stuff about women, all of this stuff about the Jews, which is invented. It doesn't really have any basis in reality at all. 100,000 Jews fought in the German army in the First World War. That's a fifth of the entire Jewish population at that time, which is, say, every able-bodied man who could fought in the German army. 12,000 of them lost their lives, and then they're blamed for it.
Wow.
So it's how these things are represented. But I think an important thing is to say we never did sort it out. There have been human societies that have done much better, but there are certain principles which, if we don't arrive at them, we are screwed. And the first is understanding we belong to a single species, that creating enmity to any other part of our species is stupid. Secondly,
that is such an important point. Please let me highlight, underline, boldface, italicize, and put big glowing neon glow around
rubric.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's such a silly idea in some people's minds. They literally can't even conceive of the idea that humanity could do something for humanity. Right? But it's just, anyway, I thank you for saying that.
We are cannibalizing our own species by fighting wars.
That's right.
It is cannibalism. And if you think about a population of seagulls that spent its time killing other seagulls, that's how smart we are.
That's right.
And
that's right.
The second part is that we have to not only care for and have respect for, as I believe the Bill of Rights says, all other human beings. They didn't mean at the time black human beings or Latinos or women, but if we actually put what it says, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all.
That's right. And it does mean that now, by the way. I mean, it didn't, maybe it didn't mean it when they wrote it down, but actually this system changed itself so that it would include them.
Yeah.
We kind of forget about that part sometimes, Yeah. This is a system that can evolve.
Yes, we can. Through the 1990s, I was very intrigued by the idea that, we were 1.7% different from chimps or bonobos. We are therefore, as Jared Diamond said, the third chimpanzee. And I really got into that. I read a lot about primatology. I read Frans de Waal, the brilliant psychologist who's looking at primate behaviors. And then after meeting Yuval Laor at Toronto, I was introduced by him to the work of his mentor, Eva Jablonka, who points out that there are 4 aspects to evolution. There is natural selection, there is social or sexual selection, there is epigenetics, and there is cultural transmission. And the penny dropped. I kind of went, we don't have to be aggressive because of our chimp cousins. We don't have to have sex with everything because of our bonobo cousins. We have minds, we can think, we have language, we can change our minds. We are not compelled to be aggressive. We are not compelled to be stupid. We can learn. and transform the way we are.
That's right.
Understanding that, if you then kind of go, well, if we don't have compassion for the rest of humanity, and it's not a matter of loving everybody, but let's stop hurting other people. Let's, look, go as far as the first do no harm. Let's get that far. If we can't do that, we're finished. Our species will kill itself off. We won't, the planet will survive without us. It might be a little bit radioactive for a while, and the cockroaches apparently won't survive that. So if anybody was worried about the cockroaches surviving and us not, they won't either. They don't like radioactivity either. Probably some kinds of worm that are all right. And after a few billion years, something else will develop, and it will look back and it'll find, compact discs of the music of ABBA, and we'll all be fine again. Or we'll find those bloody L. Ron Hubbard mausoleums.
It will be ABBA who survives us all. I am sure that is true.
Hopefully rather them than L. Ron Hubbard.
That's right. Oh, God, those vaults might last all that time, too.
That was exactly what I'm thinking. That's really terrible. Thankfully, nobody will speak English, so it won't mean anything.
That's right.
Forever. It's like they're gold CDs, mate. It'll start peeling after 20 years.
That's right. That's right.
But so the first thing is to get wise and go, oh, we're part of one family. We aren't brothers and sisters. We are cousins. All of us. Genetically, it's been demonstrated. And curiously, there are places like China, where a fifth of the world's population is, where they teach that they are separate. As a root race, they are different, the golden people from the rest of us. That is still the scientific view in China.
Jesus, really?
Yep.
God,
but having accepted that we are part of a family, even if we're just cousins, that takes us on to, well, the next part, if we want to be rational and have a nice time in the future and have our children have a decent time in the future, we also have to consider our symbiotes. What are the other creatures that are necessary to us? From the mitochondria, that bacteria that live in all of our cells, or nearly all of our cells. We've got to be nice to them. And our gut biome, which has got hundreds of different bizarre things in it.
We don't even know yet all the things that live in the gut. We don't even have names for all of them yet. They haven't figured it out yet.
Nowhere near.
No.
Nowhere near.
I mean, seriously, there's stuff in your body that has no name.
And there are archaea. There aren't just fungi, bacteria, and viruses. There are archaea, this other form of life that is inside us, and we can't trace it. So we have a vague idea. It has a lot
to do with what's going on in our brain too, by the way. There's a whole thing. I mean, we have so much learning to do about how we are the way we are. I'm telling you guys, it's so exciting and so interesting when you learn a little bit about this stuff, to know how much is on the horizon that we still have to discover. And that's where I get excited about humanity's future, is in the learning and growth and progress that's possible through that. And when you see what we do with ourselves and the way, as Jon says, we cannibalize each other, it's dumbfounding in its stupidity. You really are. Your head tilts at it. You just, what? Are we really going to do this to ourselves? Like, it's that kind of level of looking down, and I don't mean, again, to put this in a position of I'm so superior because I can see this. It's not about that. It's more like, hey, we could have a party here. Why do we have to have a war? We could have a party. Why do we have to do it this way? And that's where my frustration comes from.
Yeah, I agree absolutely and completely. We could be having a good time, and instead. And we make up all sorts of excuses for it. I mean, the other thing is that in this year, work is coming out about the brain biome. And all of these years are saying there's a blood-brain barrier that stops anything getting in there. They're going, no, you've got viruses, bacteria, bacteriophages, virus. All of that stuff is going on in your brain. So who are we and what are we?
Exactly. And how are we connected? I'm telling you, there are so many answers waiting to be discovered that are just going to blow our minds, and change the nature of how we think about ourselves and how we relate to each other. If we can get there, that's what I'm so frustrated about.
We've made some of that journey if you go back and read The Water Babies, as I had to in childhood. which was really scary. You find, this is what happens to the 4-year-olds that get stuck up chimneys, cleaning chimneys, and they die and they become water babies. It's like, they did what? And you kind of, in the Victorian times, they cleaned chimneys by sending children up them. And you're going, oh, come on. And if they got stuck, they left them there. And they sent 4-year-olds down mines. And then somewhere around the 1860s, people like Lewis Carroll invented childhood. And the middle classes started having childhood. And so we're locked in this conception of who we are as human beings without realizing it's not always been this way. We have gradually developed some kind of moral conscience. If you look in our generation, this is YouTube, so I have to say SA, that the attitudes towards the way children are treated. So I think Sweden was the first place that said, hitting children is assault under law. Oh, yeah, is it? Yeah. Oh, I should be allowed to assault my children, shouldn't I? So countries, the US stopped corporal punishment in schools long before the UK did. When I was at school, I was hit.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. When I was in school in the 70s, it was not okay, and the abuse was still there, but it was really toned down from what my parents had to experience. I had a much better experience of schooling as a result.
And we still, unfortunately, our schools are rubbish. They don't teach people what they need to know. They're still based upon Victorian notions of schooling, where you have geography and history and maths, and we separate everything out. And people like Matthew Lipman and Ken Robinson have been talking about this for decades, and hundreds of schools have broken away from this way of doing things. But we still, Finland, every 2 years, the PISA tables come out about the best schools in the world. And every 2 years, Finland is the top, in terms of literacy, the top schools in the world. They only have one exam.
Right.
Our systems are based upon politicians needing SATs so they can say, oh, literacy's gone up 0.0001% or some crap like that.
That's right.
Rather than going, let's see if, rather than socializing people into obedience, which is fundamentally what schools are for, why don't we socialize them into being social? Why don't we get them to ask questions? Why don't we enhance curiosity? My granddaughter has just come out of school. Her first 3 years of education, home education, she did really well. She's a brilliant kid. She's so impressive. Then she said she wanted to go to school. She was about 8 or something. She said she wanted to go to school. So she went to school, and she did academically better than anybody. She did really well, but the school were bothered about her attendance. She wasn't going often enough. And it got so vicious. And it's like they just, what are they actually teaching? The motto of her school was be kind. And that was not something we saw. When we complained about her being bullied, nothing happened. Nothing. But be kind. And then we were bullied by them. And then I bullied them back. And they have backed off because I'm quite good at it. But it does bring us back to, what should we be teaching kids? 10 years ago, opening our minds, we teach them what is a human predator, and not, you've got to kill these people, harm them, but recognize they have something seriously wrong with them. And if they're going to bite you, then Donald Trump's good friend Hannibal Lecter, you need to put a mask on.
That's right.
If they're going to kill people, you need to lock them up. You don't need to abuse them. You don't need to go down the same route.
That's
right. You
right.
need to protect the society from them.
That's
and
right.
the first part of that protection is recognizing when somebody exhibits these simple characteristics, they're so obvious. People who are forever boasting about themselves, forever telling you how brilliant they are. There's something wrong with them. We need to pity them.
Yeah. It's an antisocial behavior, and if we could see it early enough and recognize, universally that these things are true, then then we can help these folks, right? Then we can work it out, so we're all working together, because ultimately we are social creatures, and that's kind of how it's supposed to be.
Well,
I think.
yeah, Carl Rogers with Martin Buber, this brilliant conversation where Rogers, public conversation, he said, I think you'd agree with me. He probably didn't say it in an English accent like that. I think you'd agree with me that man is basically good, eh, Martin? And Martin Buber looked at him and he went, yes, Carl, man is basically good and evil.
It's everything. We're all of it.
I'm never going to be a Jungian. I'm never going to go to the thing that I can be every kind of nasty there is. Mm-hmm. There are people who are genuinely nice. There are people who are genuinely nasty. Not many of either. All of us in the wrong situation can commit evil.
That's right.
But the solution to predators is to treat everybody kindly. Treat everybody the same way. Treat everybody fairly. Give them equality before the law. Give them equality based upon merit. Give them, equality at work. We shouldn't be talking about feminism anymore. We should be talking about equalism. We should be, saying, and transgender issues, any of this thing, you should have the same rights.
Exactly. Rights and opportunities. That's what life is about, and that's what our institutions can help us with. And if we're thinking about, governments and institutions and structures of society, are they forwarding people getting along and working together and making a go of it, or are they hampering that and stopping that and suppressing and oppressing that? Right? And it's really kind of comes down to those two sorts of things. I think only because we've been talking for a while, and I want to start moving toward wrapping up. I'm not at all bored with what we're talking about, but I do want to start wrapping up. And I'm thinking,
my voice is beginning to go, and I've got to record an audio book.
I'm thinking that in terms of where we went with this, and I think it's probably the best possible place to go. I asked the question of, well, what am I supposed to do, or how am I supposed to connect these dots, or how am I supposed to talk about this? And I think that we've come up with probably one of the more constructive answers that could be come up with, right? Which is, well, at the end of the day, what are we all doing individually in our society to make it better for everybody? Are we doing anything? I mean, you and I are. I get to point to my work and say, yeah, I'm trying. Maybe I'm not succeeding, but I'm trying, right? I'm not trying to make things worse. I have never once said, for example, not once have I ever said that one of these human predator types should be brutally killed, get a taste of their own medicine, be thrown in a hole and be forgotten about. Not once have I ever even suggested that there should be a punishment like that for these folks, these David Miscaviges, these Keith Ranieres, right? We talk about separation for the sake of society. That's a safety point, right? I don't want to torture these people. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to have vindication through vengeance. That's not how I think we should be approaching any of this.
And I think perpetuates it.
Exactly. All it does is continue a cycle. And so in a way, the answer is really, can we just kind of drop the bullshit and kind of just, okay, well, maybe the answer is, well, what can I do for you and what can you do for me? And maybe it just comes down to that simple question and answer for each other as to how we relate to each other. Probably sounds crazy, but yet at the same time, what are we supposed to do? How are we as individuals supposed to navigate this? We're not policymakers, legislators, lawmakers, tariff provider. We're none of those things. But what we can do at an individual level is we can try to make the world a better place for each other. There's an idea.
Strangers passing on the street, by chance, two separate courses meet, and I am you, and what I see is me. And do I take you by the hand? Lead you through the land and help me understand the best I can. Roger Waters, shortly before he went completely mad.
Yeah, exactly. He had some good things to say on the turning away. That's right.
Yeah, we have to love each other or die. And W.H. Auden collected himself. That was actually used by LBJ with his atomic bomb sort of campaign. We have to love each other. And Auden didn't like the poem, which is September the 2nd, 1939. It's a work of genius. but he said, no, we have to love each other and die, not or die. and and there we are. I would recommend the work of Jiang Su, the great Chinese philosopher. I would recommend the work of Epictetus, the great Greek philosopher, who fundamentally said, hey, get on with it. Let's accept that this is what's happening. Let's not be horrible to people, and let's try and live a decent life. And I have a movie recommendation. This week I saw The Two Popes. Have you seen The Two Popes?
I have not seen The Two Popes.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I'm oddly not a Roman Catholic, but it's the discussion between Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and the incoming Pope Francis, and what is in it. And you get Jonathan Pryce of Brazil fame and many other things, and
I like
Anthony
him. He's a good
Hopkins.
actor.
Oh, he's a brilliant actor. Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, I'll
So you
definitely
get
check that out.
Hannibal Lecter as Pope Benedict. But the conversations they have in terms of how we ought to live and what it's about, and I'm an agnostic. It's not about that element of it. It's that they're talking about, how should this go on?
Right.
To what extent those conversations happen. Certainly, Francis did say the things that are attributed to him in there along the way. And he looked uncannily like Jonathan Pryce when he was younger. It's really quite strange. But to say there is hope, we do have all the tools we need to make a fantastic world.
We do.
And whether you're a little girl of 10 or 9 or 15, you only need 2, 3, 4 or 5 dolls, not 37, as the president has so wisely said. And I think we should all meditate on that. And the thing that they push babies around in, because my aphasia is preventing me from remembering the word stroller. I mean, Come on, guys, look at what you're looking at.
I know. Please.
See Jimmy Kimmel and Jon Stewart and Seth Meyers and Desi Lynick and Stephen Colbert.
So many. I mean, you wear yourself out. I think we've come to the best possible place, though, right? Because it's not, you and I can never, we could be, but I don't think it would be right to accuse us of kumbaya, right? I don't think you and I are Pollyanna.
No, gosh, no. We have fought, and I certainly have suffered as a consequence of standing up to Scientology.
That's right.
I've fought for my position in the world, and I've fought to make this better. And I have gone from being a kind of distressed teenager when I got into Scientology to being a distressed Scientologist to being distressed by Scientology who harassed me to actually now living I'm the happiest I've been since I was 5 years old and started bloody school, which didn't do me any good. I have achieved that life. How much longer that will last is another matter. I should be 70 next month. But, I've still got my hair and some of my teeth.
More than I got going on.
Just about see through one eye. But I do believe that we can get to a point where we reconcile ourselves with the world. And that's based upon, I can now look back at my life and say, well, I did my best.
Exactly. And I think there's a point that a lot of us reach like that. I'm 55 now. I'm not a spring chicken. I'm not some old geezer either. I don't see myself that way, right? I'm middle. Yeah. But when you get
middle-aged chicken,
if you don't want to have imposter syndrome, then you get to acknowledge you've seen some shit. You lived through some stuff, right? You get to say that. And you get to say, I still got a long way to go. And thank goodness that I do, because I'm kind of enjoying this thing called life. And I kind of want to do more of it. But I'd like to do it from a position that's not as naive, maybe not as like rosy-eyed, and yet still happy. I'd still like to experience some happiness in my life. I would still like to experience some joy in the world. And I think there's lots and lots and lots of reasons to feel like we can experience those things. But we got to get over ourselves with this partisan bullshit that we get into. And I've been down the road. I get it. I've been all the way down the road. I've been in a cult. I've been as partisan can be. That's what it is to be in a cult. You know, so you get it. Might come out the other side of that, and it's a little bit like, you know, going to see the wizard. You're like, oh, there's a curtain, and I get to see behind it, and oh shit, there's some crappy stuff there. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there's still all this great stuff out here, you know, to live and experience. And anyway, I'm getting a little kumbaya, so I'm gonna get past myself on that. But I just want to say that that we need to get over ourselves on this partisan crap, right? Because if we want to make America great again, seems to me getting along with one another might be a good start.
Yeah, well, let's make the world great for the first time. Let's make humanity great. Let's revel in the wonders around us, the wonder of nature, the beauty of human creation. I mean, at 70, I'm kind of going, I'm never going to have time to hear all of the beautiful music in the world, you know, and it just gets worse. You suddenly find out that, you know, we went and saw Samuel Barber's violin concerto, Dvorak's Symphony from the New World, and Copland's Appalachian Spring. And I'd always thought it was about a season, spring, but it isn't. It's about water flowing. But, yeah, right. See? And, right. But you know, and I'm very happily go and see Elbow or King Crimson. Well, King Crimson aren't touring anymore, sadly, but I saw the Dave Matthews Band last year. But I love Indian classical music, and Japanese music is fantastic. And then, of course, there's music from Britain. Oh, medieval music is incredible. And then there's the music of the Renaissance.
That's right.
And you're just going, I'm never going to catch up. So I have been offered this amazing wonder. And what am I doing? I'm bickering with people about Donald Trump and how many Barbie dolls kids can have. You know?
Exactly. I mean, come on, you know, I just think, I think there's a lot of potential in us that's unrealized, and I'd love to see the human potential realized without all the transformative culty bullshit.
Yeah, just human potential movements.
Yeah, fuck all that, right? We don't have to force. Here's the thing. Okay, here's a trick for you, right? One simple trick. You don't have to force any of this stuff. You know, it's like we're perfectly fine the way we are. We really are. You don't have to force evolution. You don't have to force, you know, anything. It's just be who you are. You'll be fine. Anyway.
Yeah, we can be human and accept. I accept that fundamentally, if there is a purpose to the universe, I'm never going to know what it is.
That's right.
And that in terms of understanding, I'm only ever going to get to the boundary of human meaning, which is not quite as big as, you know, now that there are 100 billion galaxies out there. There are 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars in each of them. Come on.
Just forget it.
You know, one galaxy is a tragedy, but 100 billion tragedies is a statistic.
Jon, thank you very much for joining me today. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been a good talk. Folks out there, okay. We're wrapping up. Thanks for coming along for the ride today. Really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of this. I know this is pretty far ranging. We started with Dianetics. You know, we go to authoritarianism, we go to Trump, we go to hope. And that's kind of where that's what you're going to get from us. So thanks for coming along for the ride. Really appreciate it. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.